Jake Morrison stood at his station on the orbital platform called Liberty and watched his screen with growing concern. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth when the alarm started screaming. Something had just appeared at the edge of the solar system and nobody knew what it was. The young officer next to him, Katie Wells, looked up from her controls with wide eyes and said the sensors were picking up a ship that did not match anything in their database. It was not from the Zentari who had been destroying human colonies for 3 years. It was not from any species they knew. Jake felt his heart start to pound as he realized this could change everything. For 3 long years, humanity had been losing the war badly. The Zentari had pushed Earth's forces back system after system, burning colonies and killing millions of people. The last major battle had been a complete disaster for the human fleet. Now Earth barely had enough ships to defend the homeworld itself. Everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the Zentari came to finish what they started. Jake thought about his daughter Emma, who lived in the underground shelters on Earth. He thought about all the people looking up at the stars and wondering if today would bring their... And Katie told him the ship was 2 kilometers long and the sensors could not identify what it was made from. Another officer named Greg Palmer said the ship was broadcasting something, but the computer could not translate it. Jake knew this was a critical moment. This unknown ship could be another enemy coming to destroy them, or it could be something else, something that might help. He made his decision quickly. He told Palmer to open communication channels on all frequencies. Palmer looked nervous but did as he was told. Jake stood in front of the camera and took a deep breath. He identified himself and asked the unknown ship to explain who they were and what they wanted. The seconds felt like hours as they waited. Then the main screen came to life. The being that appeared was not human but looked somewhat similar in basic shape. Its skin had a strange quality that seemed almost like crystal, shifting between blue and violet colors. It had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on its face. When it spoke, the words made no sense at first, but the computer started working on translation. The fragments that came through said something about connection, family, and home. Jake felt something stir inside him. Not fear, but hope. Katie suddenly said more ships were appearing. They were the same type as the first one. She counted 12, then 15 ships all appearing around the outer edge of the solar system. Jake watched the tactical display and saw something that made his breath catch. These ships were not threatening Earth. They were forming a protective barrier around it. They were defending the solar system from outside attack. He whispered a question to the alien face on the screen, asking who they were. The translation computer suddenly locked in, and the alien's words came through clearly. The voice was strange but somehow comforting. The alien said they were called the Keepers of the First Light. They had traveled far across space following echoes of an ancient song. They knew humans called themselves by that name, but the Keepers called humanity their kindred. Long ago, before humans ever looked at the stars, the Keepers had walked among them. They had planted seeds that helped humanity develop and grow. Now they had returned to find their children facing extinction. The alien continued speaking and explained that they had watched humanity from far away. They saw the first human ships go into space. They watched as humans fought bravely against the Zentari, who wanted to erase them from existence. The Keepers had laws that prevented them from interfering in the affairs of younger species. But those laws were broken now. The Zentari had brought weapons of total destruction to this part of space. The Keepers could not stand by and watch humanity die. The aliens said they came to teach humans what they needed to survive. They came to share technology and knowledge that humanity was always meant to have. They came to make sure the species they had helped so long ago would not fall into darkness. Jake felt tears start to form in his eyes. Around him on the bridge, everyone sat in shocked silence. For 3 years they had been retreating, watching their friends die and their colonies burn. They had been preparing for Earth to be the last stand. Now suddenly the universe was offering them something they thought was gone forever. A chance at survival, a real future. Palmer told Jake that Admiral Hayes from Earth Command wanted to know what was happening. Jake could not help smiling for the first time in months. He told Palmer to inform the Admiral that they had made contact with a new species. Tell her that hope had just returned to humanity. On the screen, the alien being lowered its head in what looked like respect. Behind it, Jake could see stars through the window of the alien ship. Stars that humans had once dreamed of reaching but thought they never would. The alien spoke again and said the Keepers were pleased to help their kindred. They would share their knowledge and stand with humanity against those who wished them harm. But humanity would have to fight for their own future. The Keepers would provide the tools, but humans would have to use them. Jake understood. This was not a rescue. This was a chance. A real chance to turn the war around and save Earth. He looked at the planet hanging in space below the station. Down there, his daughter was probably in school, not knowing that everything had just changed. He thought about all the billions of people who had given up hope. They would have hope again now. Jake straightened his uniform and spoke to the alien on the screen. He said that humanity accepted their help and thanked them for coming. He said that Earth would fight and would not let the Keepers down. The alien's 4 eyes seemed to shine brighter for a moment. Then the being said something that Jake would remember for the rest of his life. It said that humanity had already proven their worth by surviving this long. Now they would prove it again by winning. The screen went dark, but Jake kept staring at it. Around him, the bridge crew started talking excitedly. Orders were being sent to Earth, plans were being made. The war was not over, but for the first time in 3 years, humanity had allies. For the first time in 3 years, they had hope. The briefing room at Earth Command was filled with more people than it could properly hold. Officers stood against the walls while others sat at the large table in the center. Jake stood next to the alien ambassador who had introduced herself as Lyra. Admiral Hayes sat at the head of the table with her gray hair pulled back tight. She had the look of someone who had made too many hard choices and lost too many good people. She leaned forward and asked Lyra to explain again about the Keepers watching humanity for 50,000 years. Lyra explained that her people had not watched continuously. They had helped human ancestors develop faster thinking abilities long ago and then left them alone. This was required by their laws. They watched from far away to make sure no other species interfered with human development. When humans finally built ships that could travel in space, the Keepers knew their work had succeeded. A scientist named Helen asked why the Keepers had chosen humanity. Why help them at all? Lyra's 4 eyes showed something that looked like sadness. She said the Keepers were dying as a species. They could no longer have children. They could no longer change or grow. They faced the end not from war, but from simply stopping to evolve. The Keepers had made a choice. They decided to help other species develop faster by changing their genes slightly. In a way, they wanted to create children who would carry on after the Keepers were gone. A military officer named Barry asked how many species the Keepers had helped. Lyra said they had helped 17 species across 12 galaxies. 11 of those species survived long enough to reach space. Of those 11, humanity showed the most ability to adapt and survive. Humans faced impossible situations and refused to give up. In many ways, humans had already become better than the Keepers ever were. Admiral Hayes looked skeptical. She said, "It was convenient that the Keepers showed up just when humanity needed help." Lyra agreed that humans should be suspicious, but she explained that the Keepers did not come only because they cared about humanity. They came because the Zentari had broken ancient laws. The Zentari were using weapons that could destroy entire planets. They were killing species completely. If the Keepers allowed this to continue, other powerful species would get involved. This whole region of space would become a war zone that would kill hundreds of species. Jake spoke up quietly and said that humanity was just a convenient excuse for the Keepers to solve a bigger problem. Lyra turned her 4 eyes to look at him fully. She said yes, humanity was part of a larger strategic situation, but that did not mean the Keepers did not care. She had studied humanity for 30 years. She had listened to human music and read human books. She had watched human art develop. Humans were more than the Keepers had ever hoped to create. The Keepers would not let them be destroyed. The holographic display in the center of the table changed to show a map of space. Red marks showed where Zentari forces were positioned. Blue marks showed what was left of Earth's defense fleet. Green marks now showed the Keeper ships surrounding the solar system in a protective sphere. Lyra said the Keepers brought 15 warships with 300 people on each ship. They had weapons and shields far more advanced than anything humans or Zentari possessed. But the Keepers did not come to fight the war for humanity. They came to give humans the tools to fight it themselves. A general named Frank stood up and asked what kind of tools. Lyra said first they would share technology. Weapon designs, power systems, shield technology. Human engineers would need to adapt these designs to work with human ships, but that should be possible. Helen nodded eagerly and said if the technology was real, humans could upgrade their entire fleet in 6 months. But Lyra said technology alone would not save humanity. The Zentari had 50 times more ships than Earth did. They controlled this region of space for 2,000 years. They had resources that made Earth's factories look primitive. Humans would need more than better weapons. Admiral Hayes demanded to know what else was needed. Lyra said humans needed strategy and tactics. They needed the wisdom of species who had won wars against overwhelming numbers. The Keepers would place military advisors on every human ship. They would teach humans how to fight a different kind of war, how to use their weaknesses as strengths, how to make the Zentari afraid of humanity. A captain named Lisa asked what the Keepers wanted in return. What was the price? Lyra said simply that there was no price. The only thing the Keepers asked was for humanity to survive, to grow, to spread among the stars, to become everything they were meant to be. That was all. Jake watched the faces around the room. He saw hope fighting with doubt. He saw people who had learned that nothing was free in the universe. But he also saw something else. He saw soldiers who had been ready to die suddenly thinking they might live. He saw engineers already working out problems in their minds. He saw strategists thinking about new possibilities. Admiral Hayes stood slowly and looked directly at Lyra with her human eyes meeting the alien's 4 eyes. She said if humanity accepted this help, they would owe the Keepers a debt they could never repay. Lyra replied that humans should not think of it as a debt. They should think of it as an inheritance. The Keepers had given human ancestors the ability to reach for the stars long ago. Now they were giving humans the means to keep those stars. What humanity did with that gift was completely up to them. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. Then she straightened and said that on behalf of Earth and all human colonies, she accepted the offer of help. She hoped this was not a mistake. Lyra said with complete certainty that it was not a mistake. It was the first step toward making sure that when the Keepers finally faded away, they would not be forgotten. Humanity would remember. Humanity would endure. Jake felt something run down his spine. Not fear, but the weight of possibility. Just days ago, he had been preparing to watch Earth fall. Now he stood in a room where humanity's entire future was being rewritten. The briefing ended and officers scattered to their new jobs. Helen came over to Jake with excitement in her voice. She said the things the Keepers were sharing were incredible. Power systems that made human reactors look like old steam engines. Weapons that could punch through Zentari shields easily. Ways to build ships in weeks instead of months. Jake said it sounded too good to be true. Helen said she had been studying the Keeper technical data for hours. It was all real. They really might have a chance now. Jake looked out the window at Earth hanging in space below. Somewhere down there, his daughter was probably in school learning normal things and not knowing the universe had just shifted. He said quietly that maybe they did have a chance now. Maybe they really did. 6 months had passed since the Keepers arrived, and now the upgraded destroyer Phoenix was ready to fight. Commander Claire stood on the bridge with her hands steady on the controls, even though her heart was racing. Her crew had trained hard for this moment. Lieutenant Sam at the tactical station reported that a Zentari battle group was holding position near the asteroid belt. 3 heavy cruisers, 7 destroyers, and 1 command carrier. They were sending the usual message demanding that humans surrender. The Keeper advisor named Tarn stood next to Claire. His crystalline skin caught the light as he spoke. He said the Zentari had not adapted yet. They still saw humans as weak prey that could be easily hunted. This would be their mistake. Claire studied the display showing enemy positions. Before the Keeper upgrades, a force that size would have needed every ship Earth had left, just to have a chance of winning. Even then, it would have cost many lives. Now the Phoenix was not alone. 7 other upgraded destroyers moved through the asteroid field in perfect coordination. Their new stealth systems made them almost invisible to Zentari sensors. Above them, the Keeper warship Eternal Vigil waited and watched. The Keepers had made it clear this fight belonged to humanity. Lieutenant Amy at communications said all ships reported ready. Admiral Hayes had sent a message saying that Earth was watching this battle. Claire thought about the pressure they were under. This would be the first real victory against the Zentari in 3 years. If they won, it would prove humanity could fight back. If they lost, well, she did not want to think about that. Claire told all ships to prepare for attack pattern Delta 7 on her command. Tarn nodded his approval. He said the Zentari commander would expect a flanking attack. Pattern Delta 7 would confuse their predictions. Claire ordered the helm to turn the ship and told Tactical to charge the new weapons. The Phoenix shuddered slightly as the upgraded power core fed energy to weapon systems that used Keeper technology. The display showed Zentari vessels waiting in their formation, confident that any human force would be easily destroyed. Claire gave the command to attack. The 7 human destroyers burst from the asteroid field at the same time. Their attack angles were calculated to split the Zentari formation, but instead of the expected flanking move, the Phoenix and 3 other ships angled upward while 4 ships dove down. Sam reported the Zentari vessels were breaking formation. They looked confused. Then they started launching fighters. Claire said calmly to let them launch. Those fighters were about to have a very bad day. The Zentari fighters flew in a large swarm from the command carrier straight into a surprise. The 4 destroyers that had gone below suddenly revealed themselves. The space between them lit up with energy beams forming a deadly grid pattern. The Zentari fighters flew directly into it. Many died instantly. The rest tumbled through space with damaged ships and dying pilots. Sam reported with excitement that they scored a direct hit on the lead cruiser. The Zentari shields were failing because they had never encountered weapons like these before. Claire ordered all ships to focus their fire on the command carrier. If they took out Zentari coordination, the rest would fall apart. The battle became intense. The Phoenix moved through space avoiding enemy fire. Its enhanced shields absorbed hits that would have destroyed it 6 months ago. Its weapons cut through enemy armor easily. But the Zentari were not helpless. One of the human destroyers called Defiant took a direct hit from a heavy cruiser. Claire watched in horror as the ship's side exploded in fire and debris. Amy reported that Defiant was losing air. They were moving survivors to the other side of the ship. Claire immediately told them to fall back. The Phoenix would cover their escape. But Tarn said quietly to watch. On the display, the damaged Defiant did not retreat. Instead, it accelerated directly toward the Zentari heavy cruiser that had hit it. Claire realized what Captain Roy was planning just before it happened. She whispered that he was going to ram them. Tarn said it was a warrior's choice. The Keepers honored such courage. The Defiant struck the Zentari cruiser at full speed. Its power core exploded on impact. The explosion was so bright it overloaded the Phoenix sensors. When the light faded, both ships were gone. Only debris remained. But Roy's sacrifice had broken the Zentari formation. The remaining enemy ships suddenly had no leader, and were facing human ships that fought with unexpected strength and impossible weapons. They made the decision to run. Sam reported with disbelief in his voice that Zentari forces were jumping to faster than light speed. They were retreating. The bridge erupted with cheers. Crew members hugged each other with tears running down their faces. They had forgotten what victory felt like. Claire felt her own eyes burning but forced herself to stay focused. She ordered a casualty report and the mood became serious immediately. Amy checked her console with a grave expression. She said Defiant was lost with everyone on board. 2 other ships called Relentless and Guardian had moderate damage and casualties. Total human losses were 347 people, 347 lives lost. People who had families waiting for them. People who had hopes and dreams that would never happen now. But the Zentari had lost much more. For the first time since the war began, humanity had proven they could fight back and win. Claire ordered all ships to form up for the return to Earth. She told them to prepare a full honor guard for the Defiant's fallen crew. Those people bought this victory with their lives. Everyone needed to know it. Tarn approached her and said in his alien voice that humans fought well. Their tactics were sound and their courage was strong. The Keepers were pleased to call humanity their kindred. Claire asked quietly if it would be enough. One battle, one victory at the edge of their territory. The Zentari controlled thousands of systems. Their fleets had tens of thousands of ships. How could humanity possibly win? Tarn said she was asking the wrong question. Humanity did not need to conquer the Zentari. They only needed to make the Zentari fear them, to make hunting humans too expensive. Today they began that process. Today they showed the Zentari that humans do not die quietly. Claire looked at the tactical display. She looked at the debris field where Defiant made its final stand. She looked at the retreating Zentari vessel still visible at the edge of sensor range. She said softly that no, humans definitely do not die quietly. 3 days later, Jake stood in Admiral Hayes' office watching news broadcasts spread across Earth and every human colony. People were calling it the Battle of the Belt, Earth's first victory, humanity's turning point. Admiral Hayes said the Phoenix was being celebrated as a hero ship. Commander Claire was getting promoted to captain and given command of their first upgraded heavy cruiser. Jake said she deserved it. The Admiral asked about Captain Roy. Hayes said he was being given the Star of Terra posthumously. His family would receive it next week. The Keeper said this was just the beginning, that humanity needed to press their advantage while the Zentari were still shocked. Admiral Hayes asked Jake what he thought. Jake said that 6 months ago she had been planning Earth's last stand. She was writing orders to send everyone into tunnels when the Zentari came. She was preparing to watch humanity's homeworld burn. Admiral Hayes nodded and said now she was planning offensive operations. Now she was thinking about taking back lost colonies. Now she dared to hope her grandchildren might see peace. Jake understood exactly what she meant. Hope was dangerous in war. It made you vulnerable. It made you dream of futures that might never come. But hope was also the only thing that made fighting worthwhile. Admiral Hayes said the Keepers wanted to teach humanity more. New technologies and tactics. They wanted to place advisors with every major fleet. Some leaders were nervous about letting aliens have that much access to human military forces. She asked Jake what he thought. Jake said they would be fools not to take every advantage offered. The Zentari would not give humanity a second chance if they failed. Admiral Hayes said she wanted Jake to coordinate the advisor program. He made first contact with the Keepers. He spent more time with Lyra than anyone else. He understood them better than most. Jake said honestly that he was not sure anyone really understood them. But he would do it. For Emma, for Earth, for all of humanity. Admiral Hayes smiled, which was rare on her tired face. She said it was for humanity's future. The Keepers gave them a gift. They gave them hope. Now humans needed to prove they were worthy of it. Jake looked out the window at Earth below. That blue and green planet held everything humanity had ever been and might someday be again. Somewhere up in the darkness, Keeper ships stood watch, ancient protectors making sure their children survived to inherit the stars. Jake said with quiet conviction that they would prove it. Whatever it took, humanity would prove they deserved this chance. 18 months after the Battle of the Belt, the war had changed in ways nobody expected. Jake stood in the briefing room of the new command station Unity and watched holographic displays of dozens of star systems update in real time. Captain Claire, promoted after her victory on the Phoenix, reported that the Zentari had pulled back from 7 systems in the past 3 months. They were bringing their forces together but stretching their supply lines too thin. The Keeper advisor Tarn believed the Zentari were preparing for a major attack. Jake studied the patterns carefully. Something bothered him about the Zentari positions. He said they were being too obvious. The Zentari were proud but not stupid. This looked like bait to draw human forces into a trap. Helen, now the Chief Science Officer for Human and Keeper Joint Research, changed the hologram to show different angles. She said their intelligence suggested the Zentari were genuinely struggling to adapt to human tactics. Zentari military doctrine had not changed significantly in 200 years. Humans were forcing them to evolve, and evolution was always painful. Lieutenant General Paul, a veteran who had lost 3 sons early in the war, leaned back in his chair. He said he did not care if it was bait or real retreat. Every system they took back meant millions more humans freed from Zentari occupation. He voted to push forward. Ambassador Lyra, whose crystalline form had become a familiar sight in Earth's command structure, spoke carefully. She said they should push forward, but with caution. The Zentari were wounded, and wounded predators were often most dangerous. Admiral Hayes entered the room and everyone stood up. She waved them back to their seats tiredly. She said she just came from a meeting with civilian leaders. They wanted to know when peace negotiations would start. A bitter laugh went around the room. The Zentari had never responded to human communication except to demand surrender. General Paul said angrily that politicians did not understand. This was not that kind of war. The Zentari did not want human resources or territory. They wanted humanity extinct. Lyra said quietly that perhaps things were changing. Her people had been monitoring Zentari communications. There were cracks appearing in their command structure. Factions were forming. Some Zentari commanders were beginning to question whether destroying humanity was worth the cost. Claire said firmly that was good. Let them question. Let them break apart. Maybe they would destroy themselves and save humanity the trouble. Jake shook his head. He said it was not that simple. A fractured enemy could be unpredictable. If they were not careful, some desperate Zentari faction might use those planet-destroying weapons the Keepers had warned about. The room fell silent. Everyone feared the Zentari planet-breaker weapons. The Keepers had shown surveillance footage of what those weapons could do. Entire worlds reduced to debris in minutes. Helen said the Keepers promised their ships could intercept planet-breaker weapons. Their shield technology and defense systems were designed specifically to counter them. But Admiral Hayes pointed out that only worked if Keeper ships were in position. Only if the Zentari did not find a way around their defenses. Only if humanity got lucky. Jake said they had been lucky so far. Maybe that was enough. But even as he spoke, he knew better. Luck always ran out eventually. The conversation continued for another hour with plans being made and changed. When the meeting ended, Jake found himself walking with Lyra through the station's observation corridor. The Keeper said he was worried. It was not a question. Jake replied that they were winning. By every measure, they were pushing the Zentari back. Their fleet was stronger than ever. Morale was high. Colonies were being freed. But something troubled him. Lyra asked what troubled him, and Jake explained. Before the Keepers arrived, humans were desperate. They made impossible choices just to survive another day. Now they were on offense. They were burning Zentari supply bases and destroying their ships. He saw the look in human soldiers' eyes. They were starting to enjoy the fighting. Lyra was silent for a long moment, her 4 eyes gazing at the stars. She said war changed all species. The question was whether you let it change you permanently, or whether you remembered who you were before the fighting began. Jake asked if war had changed the Keepers. Lyra said yes, long ago. The Keepers fought wars that consumed entire regions of galaxies. They developed weapons that could destroy stars. They became very good at destruction. Her voice carried ancient sorrow. When the fighting finally ended, they looked at what they had become and were horrified. They swore never again. They became seekers of knowledge and keepers of peace. But that came at a cost. They lost the ability to change and adapt. They became frozen in their own idea of perfection. Jake said he understood now. That was why the Keepers seeded other species. They wanted children who would not make their mistakes. Lyra turned her 4 eyes to face him. She said they wanted inheritors who would be better than them, who would have their wisdom without their regrets, their knowledge without their scars. She asked Jake what humanity was becoming. He was becoming what they needed to be to survive. The question was whether they could remember how to be something else once survival was assured. Before Jake could answer, alarms started screaming throughout the station. Both of them ran back to the command center where Admiral Hayes was already at the main console looking pale. Jake demanded a report. Captain Claire said multiple Zentari fleets were moving toward Earth, not just from border systems but from everywhere. Every ship the Zentari had was coming. Hundreds of vessels, thousands. It was the massive attack Earth had expected since the war began, arriving 18 months late but just as terrifying. Admiral Hayes asked how long until they reached Earth. Her voice was steady despite the catastrophic data on the screens. Claire said 72 hours at current speed, maybe less if they pushed their engines harder. Admiral Hayes immediately gave orders. Signal all human fleets. Everyone pulls back. Everyone comes home. They would defend Earth or die trying. She turned to Lyra and asked how many Keeper ships could be there in 3 days. Lyra replied that all 15 Keeper ships were already in the solar system. They had anticipated this possibility, but she warned that even with their advanced technology, 15 ships could not stand against that many enemies alone. The mathematics were brutal. Jake said firmly that they would make new mathematics. They had 3 days to prepare, 3 days to turn Earth into a fortress the Zentari would break themselves against. 3 days to show them that humanity did not just fight back anymore. They won. Admiral Hayes nodded sharply. She ordered every captain, every engineer, every strategic mind brought together. Strip every resource from every station and outpost. If it could shoot, shield, or plan strategy, she wanted it at Earth in 72 hours. This was it. This was the battle that decided whether humanity survived or died. The command center exploded into frantic activity with people rushing to their stations and making urgent calls. Jake looked at the display showing Earth hanging peaceful and blue in space. His daughter Emma was down there. She was 17 now and already talking about joining the fleet when she turned 18. He had spent the last year and a half fighting to make sure she had a future to join. Now he had 3 days to make sure that future existed at all. He said quietly that they were not going to lose. They could not lose after coming this far. He was not sure if he was talking to Lyra, to the Admiral, or to himself. Lyra placed a crystalline hand on his shoulder. The gesture was awkward but sincere. She said the Keepers would stand with humanity. If this was to be the final battle, it would be one the galaxy never forgot. Jake took a deep breath and turned back to the command console. 3 days, 72 hours, 4,320 minutes to prepare for the greatest battle humanity had ever faced. He thought about his daughter. He thought about all the people on Earth looking up at the stars. He thought about everything they had fought for and everyone they had lost. Then he got to work. There was no time to waste. Earth orbit had been transformed into a massive defensive position. Jake stood on the bridge of the new battleship Titan, humanity's first capital ship designed completely with Keeper technology. Around him stretched a defensive network that would have been impossible 2 years ago. Commander Lisa, now serving as executive officer on the Titan, reported that final defensive positions were confirmed. They had 47 human vessels in the inner ring and 93 in the outer perimeter. The Keeper ships were distributed throughout the formation. Jake studied the tactical display with grim determination. By the numbers, it would never be enough. The Zentari Armada coming toward Earth had over 3,000 ships, ranging from small destroyers to massive dreadnoughts that made even the Titan look small. But numbers did not tell the whole story. Lieutenant Chris at Communications said Ambassador Lyra was asking if Jake wanted to address the fleet before the battle. Jake thought for a moment about what he could possibly say that would matter. Then he thought of Emma safe in underground shelters with millions of other civilians, looking up through kilometers of rock and steel at the battle about to happen. Jake told Chris to open a channel on all frequencies. He wanted every ship, every station, every person in the system to hear. The light went green and Jake took a breath. He identified himself as Admiral Morrison, having received a field promotion an hour ago along with overall command of Earth's defense. He spoke to every man and woman standing between Earth and extinction. He spoke to the Keeper allies who traveled so far to fight beside them. He spoke to everyone listening in the shelters below. He told them to understand something important. 2 years ago they were losing badly. They were beaten and counting down days until humanity's end. But then something changed. The Keepers arrived, yes, but that was not what really changed them. What changed them was the decision to fight back. What changed them was refusing to accept extinction as inevitable. The Zentari were coming with the largest armada in their history. They intended to wipe humanity out today and erase them from the universe as if they never existed. They expected humans to break, to scatter, to die quietly like every other species they hunted to extinction. Jake's voice hardened. He said the Zentari were going to be disappointed. Humanity was not like every other species. They adapted. They improvised. They looked at impossible odds and laughed. When someone tried to erase them, they took it personally. He said here was what would happen. They would stand their ground. They would make the Zentari pay for every meter of space, every second of time, every life they tried to take. They would show the Zentari and every other species watching that humanity did not just survive. They thrived. They endured. They won. He finished by saying this was for Earth, for their future, for everyone they lost and everyone they were fighting to save. The channel closed. Around the bridge, his crew stood straighter with their fear replaced by determination. On the tactical display, the Zentari Armada entered outer sensor range. Lisa reported calmly that contact would happen in 90 seconds. All ships reported ready. The Keepers were in position. Jake activated his private channel to Lyra, whose ship Eternal Vigil held position directly above Earth's North Pole. Jake said this was Lyra's last chance to run. This was going to get very bad. Lyra replied that Keepers did not run from those who threatened their children. Besides, humans had a saying about showing others hell, did they not? Despite everything, Jake laughed. He told all ships to charge weapons and wait for his command. The Zentari armada swept into range like a massive red wave. Their formation was classic military doctrine, using overwhelming force to break through any defense. Under normal circumstances, it would have worked. These were not normal circumstances. Jake gave the command to activate their surprise. The space between Earth and the approaching armada suddenly lit up with hundreds of small objects that had been hiding in debris fields and asteroids. Not ships or weapons, but drones, thousands of them, each equipped with keeper shield generators and human creativity. The tactical officer reported the drone grid was active and forming a barrier. The Zentari fleet hit the drone network and suddenly found themselves trapped in a maze of energy barriers. Their massive formation broke into dozens of smaller groups. The overwhelming numerical advantage became a problem, as ships could not coordinate or communicate with the rest of their fleet. Jake ordered all ships to pick targets and use standard pack tactics. Keeper vessels focused on Zentari dreadnoughts. What followed was chaos. The human fleet, smaller and faster, moved through gaps in the drone barrier like sharks through fish. Keeper ships with their powerful weapons carved through enemy dreadnoughts with precision, but the Zentari were not helpless. They adapted quickly, coordinating in smaller groups and finding gaps in human defenses. Jake watched in horror as the destroyer Relentless took 3 direct hits and broke apart with its crew lost instantly. Lisa said quietly the casualty reports were coming in. They had lost 7 ships in the first 5 minutes. Estimated enemy losses were 63 vessels. Good numbers by any standard, but not good enough. Jake ordered the outer perimeter to fall back to secondary positions. They would compress the Zentari formation and make it harder for them to move. The battle raged for hours. The careful defensive plan gave way to brutal close-quarters combat. The Zentari realized they had been outsmarted and simply threw more ships forward. Numbers began to matter. The human fleet, taking damage faster than it could be repaired, slowly fell back toward Earth. Then everything changed. The tactical officer reported urgently that they were detecting massive power spikes from the Zentari command ship. The energy signature matched Keeper intelligence on planet breaker weapons. They were targeting Earth directly. Jake felt his blood turn to ice. This was the nightmare. If that weapon fired and hit Earth, nothing would save the billions below. He immediately ordered Keeper vessels to intercept. Lyra's voice came through saying they were already moving. All Keeper ships were converging on the command vessel. Jake watched as the 15 Keeper warships moved with perfect precision and formed a sphere around the Zentari command ship. Their shields linked, creating an almost impenetrable barrier. The planet breaker weapon charged with its energy signature, growing until it lit up every sensor. Then it fired. The beam capable of destroying a planet hit the Keeper shield network with the force of an exploding star. For 3 eternal seconds, the linked shields held, containing the impossible energy. Then they failed. The backlash tore through the Keeper formation. 3 ships disintegrated instantly. 2 more tumbled away with breached hulls and dying crews. But the blast had been contained and redirected. The energy that should have killed Earth scattered harmlessly into space. Jake shouted into the communication channel for Lyra to respond. There was only static. Then weakly, Lyra said Eternal Vigil was functional but barely. They lost many good people. But Earth still stood. That was what mattered. The Zentari command ship with its planet breaker weapon drained sat vulnerable in space. Jake did not hesitate. He ordered all ships to fire everything they had. Every human vessel that could shoot opened fire on the command ship. Surviving Keepers added their weapons. The Zentari vessel, built to project power rather than withstand attack, crumbled under the assault. When its reactor finally exploded, the blast was visible from Earth's surface. Just like that, the battle turned. Without their command ship and without coordination, the Zentari armada began to fall apart. Some vessels tried to press the attack. Others attempted to retreat. Most simply held position, waiting for orders that would never come. Jake opened a channel on all Zentari frequencies. He identified himself and said their command was gone. Their planet breaker weapon had failed. They had lost. He offered one chance to withdraw with their lives. Leave the solar system now and humans would not pursue. Stay in humans would destroy every last ship. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then one by one, Centauri ships began jumping to faster than light speed. Not in formation or with dignity, but in pure disorganized retreat. The flight became a mass exodus. Within 30 minutes, the massive armada that came to destroy Earth had fled, leaving behind debris fields and hundreds of disabled vessels. Lisa said with emotion thick in her voice that they were gone. All of them. They won. The bridge erupted in cheers. Jake slumped in his command chair, suddenly feeling every sleepless hour from the past 3 days. They won. Against impossible odds, Earth survived. But at what cost? He asked quietly for casualty reports. The celebration died instantly. Lisa checked her console and her face drained of color. Final numbers were still coming, but preliminary reports showed 29 human ships destroyed, 17 more critically damaged. Total personnel losses estimated at over 12,000. The Keepers lost 5 ships and took heavy damage to the remaining 10. Their casualties numbered over 4,000. Jake closed his eyes. This was victory, not the celebrations starting in the streets below, though those were real. Not humanity's survival, though that was precious. Victory looked like empty chairs at dinner tables. Like children who would never see parents again. Like names being added to memorial walls.